Hey everyone, thanks for taking time to join us today. Thanks to Claudia and the rest of the Magnify organising team for inviting us. We're absolutely delighted to be here. I'm John. I'm one of the founders of a company called Paper, which is a research and design company. My background is in delivery and project management.
Hi, my name is Beth. My background is in languages and subtitling, and I worked at Paper during this project as a delivery manager and user researcher. And this was one of the projects that I kind of pitched to Paper. So yeah, today we're going to talk about the research project we did. It was called "How Do Deaf British Sign Language Users Experience Suspense in Film?" We are both hearing people, but we were interested in whether deaf audiences were getting the same sort of intended cinematic experience as hearing audiences. So in our talk today, we're going to share learnings and insights from this research project and some next steps. And just for the purposes of today, I'm going to be saying things like subtitles and captions. And yeah, for today and for this research, they are the same thing. So text on screen that's designed to represent the dialogue, music, and background sounds of a film. So the idea of the project was sparked sort of by my passion, interest for languages and subtitling, particularly creative subtitling and its potential for the deaf community. Creative subtitling is a new practice that involves designing visually engaging and immersive subtitles. So, ones that are tailored to the style of the video and they can have different fonts, positions, movements, and it favors experimentation and innovation. I've put some examples on this clip here. So in the top one is from a spicy Doritos advert, and Peter Dinklage is exploding out of a fireplace. So I've put it in fiery font to match the moment. And the one below is a Disney short about two volcanoes that fall in love, and there's like they're surrounded by clouds. So I've put the font in the sky in this cloudy font to kind of match the environment. Um, so yeah, it is quite a new concept, and there are a lot of different ideas to explore about its uses and benefits. But some research suggests that it could benefit deaf and hard of hearing people. For example, you could position text near the speaker, so it's clear who's talking at any given moment, and you can visualize sounds or certain words to increase understanding as well. So these are the goals for the project. I watch absolutely everything with captions, and I'd also been observing that certain captions that describe sound, such as like brackets, ominous music, might be quite subjective or possibly have no meaning to someone who doesn't experience sound in the same way as the filmmaker or the captioner. So, from a research perspective, I wanted to understand if deaf participants were experiencing these suspenseful moments, um, how the filmmaker intended. So during our prep, we met with charities and consultants in the deaf community because originally I wanted to do research with deaf and hard of hearing audiences, but I knew, this is quite a broad range of people whose experiences and needs are quite wide ranging. So we needed to decide, who to prioritize for this research and how to define that group of people. Um, but yeah, our conversations highlighted that there's little existing research that focuses on experiences of people who are deaf with a capital D. So these are people who've been deaf all their lives and their first or preferred language is BSL, British Sign Language. So I thought, yeah, I want to help contribute to this and make our findings as accessible and beneficial to the deaf community as possible. Um, so yeah, the focus of the project is around suspense. I chose this as like an area to start off with around how people experience film and TV in general, but I kind of like condensed it down to something smaller. So I chose suspense. I knew filmmakers kind of craft sound for a very specific purpose in their films, for a specific reaction or feeling. And I was interested in how the descriptions and captions kind of impacted people's experience of suspense. So I read a bunch of academic papers about cinematic suspense and sort of tried to come up with this like plain English definition that I could use with participants. So suspense in film or TV is when you are immersed in what's happening on screen. You know something good or bad is going to happen to a character that you care about, but you're uncertain of the outcome. So, when you're really engrossed in a film and you're just really in it and something's about to happen and you're like, oh my God, what's what's going to happen? It's that kind of that feeling. So what we did was to kind of test this. We did interviews with 8 deaf participants in the end with a BSL interpreter, and we got them to watch the opening scenes of 3 kind of suspenseful clips. So the first one was Jaws, which is a thriller about a killer shark. The second was A Quiet Place, which is a horror sci-fi about aliens that will kill you if you make noise. And then the third one is The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is a Disney musical. We chose opening scenes because it means that you don't need any kind of background context to understand what's happening. It should build that as it's being introduced. We also wanted a mix of genres, and we wanted captions from different platforms. So for Jaws, we used the captions from Netflix. A Quiet Place, we had a choice between Netflix or Amazon Prime. I decided to go for the Netflix ones in the end because Amazon Prime only had about 8 captions for like the whole 9-minute clip, whereas the Netflix one had way more and was way more descriptive. But you can already see kind of the differences in platforms already there. And then Hunchback of Notre Dame, we used the Disney Plus captions. We also wanted to show kind of different types of sound. So sounds that the characters can hear, like waves crashing, phone ringing. That's known as diegetic sound. And then there's non-diegetic sound, which is sounds that only the audience can hear. So like the music score and things like that. And yeah, we also asked people about their thoughts and feelings about suspense to try and understand whether their experience was kind of how the filmmakers intended.
We partnered with the University of Sheffield for this project and worked with 2 brilliant academic researchers. Kirsty is an expert in disability research, and Ryan is an expert in film studies. And their time was funded through something called the Sheffield Innovation Programme. As a team of hearing people, we knew it was likely we were going to make some mistakes, and we wanted to avoid that wherever we possibly could. So we created something called the Deaf Advisory Board, and they provided advice, guidance, and critique throughout the project. It was made up of Celia and Tyrone, who are both deaf researchers and both use BSL, British Sign Language. And we also work with Kat, who is a BSL interpreter.
So I'm quickly just going to go through the insights from our research. So firstly, deaf participants told us that descriptions of sound were really important to them when watching a film, but descriptions that had more detail or more contextual information were better at building suspense alongside the visuals because they could create a better picture of what was happening, which gave them a better understanding of the plot and a deeper connection to the characters. So in this clip, someone told us they give you an indication of the materials and the types of sound movements. There's so many details. And I think that was about A Quiet Place. So some examples from that clip that were, quite descriptive were things like container scrapes against the glass shelf, really showing that these characters are trying not to make any noise. However, there were multiple factors that caused participants to stop feeling suspense. So if the captions were confusing or too complex, the participants had to work harder to understand what was happening, and that interrupted their feeling of suspense. So someone told us, I couldn't keep up with the captions. I was trying to work out visually what was happening and I couldn't. I think this one's from, A Hunchback of Notre Dame. So in this clip, there's a narrator, there's a choir off screen singing in Latin, there's characters singing and speaking to each other sort of interchangeably. Lots of stuff going on. It is quite challenging to follow the text and the visuals at the same time. There were also fundamental things in some of the clips where descriptions of sound kind of lacked key information. So, for example, in Jaws, I don't know if you've seen it, but throughout the film, you can only see the shark for about 4 minutes, like towards the end. So for the rest of the film, that iconic music kind of is the shark. It means the shark is coming and it's going to eat you. But in the clip, the music is described as sporadic faint cello and double bassoon, or mysterious string music. And our participants didn't realize that that meant, the shark was coming. So, I think it really did affect the level of suspense they were feeling. And it was interesting how, this research looking into how being taken away from feeling from suspense when watching a film is kind of linked to wider experiences of inequality and feelings of exclusion. So participants told us that in day-to-day life, without access to good quality captions, they can feel excluded. So someone told us, I don't feel like I'm equal. I feel like I'm not an important person to society. Um, and examples of this were just throughout all their day-to-day experiences, like going to the cinema and captions not showing up, or Channel 4 losing access to all their captions, and it means they couldn't watch Bake Off with everyone else, and things like that. So at the end of the research, I also wanted to come up with recommendations that I thought maybe could be helpful to the media industry to think about how they could maybe make things a bit more accessible for the deaf community, and hopefully start a dialogue with the deaf community as well, see if they have any other ideas as well of what could be improved. I'll just rattle through these really quickly. So captions should be designed collaboratively by captioners, filmmakers, and deaf consultants. This should happen throughout the filmmaking process and not be an afterthought at the end of filmmaking. Filmmakers should rethink and redesign how audio is presented visually for deaf audiences, for example, through creative captions. Captions should be tested with deaf audiences before a film's released to ensure people are getting the intended experience of the film, just like films are tested now. Personalization of captions should be explored to allow people to choose the style of the captions. Like, I know you can pick font, color, size, maybe placement at the minute, but I'm talking about like the level of description or creativity used within the captions to suit people's preferences. UK cinemas should offer more frequent and more convenient screening times for caption viewings, and more investment and budget is needed to fund like innovation and research in captioning and accessibility, to create more accessible experiences. Accessibility should be given the same level of investment and creative freedom as every other part of the film.
Okay, so now we've talked through background to the work, we're going to share 4 things that we did throughout this project to make the research as accessible as possible. First up, we did a few things to make the research materials accessible. We provided visual details wherever we could, which was another suggestion from the Deaf Advisory Board. So we shared pictures of the full team, and we learned that this helped provide reassurance quite early on. We provided a phone number and an email address for contact, and we learned again from the Deaf Advisory Board that deaf people often use WhatsApp. We offered a choice of in-person and remote for the research sessions. For in-person, we shared pictures of the university buildings, parking, public transport, that kind of stuff. And then for remote, we used Zoom, which was a recommendation for an accessible tool. Second is all our participants, English was their second language. So we used a BSL translation company to translate all the materials into BSL videos. Those videos range from being a few seconds long to a few minutes long, and it covered things like register interest form, consent form, participant information, right through to accompanying social media posts as well. We wanted to and we needed to keep things really simple throughout this project. BSL is a different language. Not every word in English translates into BSL. We had to learn to be really careful and considerate. It was really difficult. Both myself and Beth found this really hard. We had to think carefully about every single word that we were writing down. Was it necessary? Was it needed? And did it translate? It took a lot of time, but it was really essential that we put that work in. And then last one, you hopefully got the idea, but throughout this project, everything we did, we got advice from the Deaf Advisory Board. They provided critique and guidance and advice throughout the entire project. We're going to show one quick example. The text on screen is what Beth talked about earlier. It's our definition of suspense. It's quite a lot of text, particularly for a research project that is looking at and talking about suspense. This would have taken quite a lot of time to translate and sign into BSL multiple times in each research session. So we asked the Deaf Advisory Board if they could provide a bit of help. Just so we're clear, I'm going to share a very short video. It's only 5 seconds long. The Deaf Advisory Board haven't created a new sign in BSL. They've taken our definition of suspense and created a sign that helps for the context of our research session. We're really proud of that. It's only a short clip, it's only 5 seconds long, but it's just one of the many reasons that the advisory board worked so well for us. We learned a lot throughout this project, things that we simply didn't know before we started. And as a collection of researchers and designers, we hope that the following 5 things you find helpful and useful. The first is to carefully consider what data is used to select participants. We encountered people who signed up for the research and completed our eligibility questionnaire with the information that we wanted to see, but it turned out they weren't deaf. We think that people did this for the incentive vouchers that were offered. We're not making any judgments. It's been a tough few years. We were looking for participants that were deaf from birth, that used BSL as their first or preferred language, and that were aged 18 or over. We hid monitoring data. We weren't choosing people based on this. So things like name, address, email, ethnicity, right through to the date and time that people complete a form were simply not important for us on this project. But it came back to bite us. By not looking at this data, it meant that we couldn't spot some trends of suspicious data before it happened. Second, ending a session when the participant right is rarely discussed, and we think it should be. In the end, we had 13 sessions booked in, but only 8 were usable. The other people weren't deaf. We developed a pattern on the fly to help with this, and that pattern was Kat opening the sessions using BSL and then asking some simple clarification questions, and that really worked for us.
Other things were like trying to avoid hearing bias where possible. This is definitely something that I still struggle with and have done today even, but saying things like participants said, we spoke to participants, you should say things like participants told us, we met with participants, things like that. Also not saying, you know, the deaf, it's deaf people, deaf communities. These are all things that the advisory board kind of, yeah, advised us about and were really helpful. Also, BSL interpreters are like hotcakes. They get booked up months in advance. So to find a registered interpreter, you can use nrcpd.org.uk, which is the National Register of Communication Professionals working with deaf and deafblind people. Involve them early on, share as much info as you can about the project with them, do test runs with them. Also, it may be obvious, but research sessions with deaf participants will take longer. So for ours, I think we planned around a 45-minute session and then doubled it as a starting point and then tested it. Also, if it's over 60 minutes, you might need 2 interpreters, but the interpreters will advise you when you get in touch with them about that. Also, if you have the budget, I would totally recommend having the advisory board like throughout the research at all stages and be part of the research team. Unfortunately for ours, we had to use the advisory board at certain key moments in the research, like usually proofing things after the fact. But next time we'll do it differently if we can. Also, I'd recommend using a qualified deaf translator to translate your interview recordings from BSL into written English as like best practice. We'll definitely be doing that next time in the budget if it allows.
Okay, we thought we'd end today by sharing a few things that are happening next with this work. We've been working on a separate project to animate the findings and the insights, and it's ended up with a 4-minute film that's going to launch a few days after this conference is happening. We're recording this in September, but the film launches in November. We're working again with Kirsty and Ryan at the University of Sheffield alongside a really talented animator called Josh. We've created another deaf advisory board for this project, this time working with a deaf illustrator called James. Beth said right at the very start of this that one of our aim is to share the findings with the deaf community, and we hope that we're doing this in an engaging way that's accessible. The film's going to live on the University of Sheffield website, and future will be able to post a link to this. The first screening actually takes place on the 17th of November, so probably 2 days after this session is being aired. We're doing a live screening and then a live Q&A with Beth, myself, Kirsty, Ryan and Josh, and Kat is returning to interpret the Q&A session. If anyone happens to be in Sheffield City Centre on the afternoon of Friday, the 17th of November, pop along. Future us will add some details and links to it. We really want to do more work with this. There is a lot more work to do. I'm really proud of the work and effort that we put in on this project. To do more, we need to find some external funding. We want to talk with the deaf community a bit more, and we want to speak to the film industry as well. If anybody has any ideas about funding opportunities, we'd really appreciate that. Please let us know. And that's it. Thanks very much for your time today. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask us. We also know and appreciate that asking questions in this setting might not be right for everyone. Our email addresses and LinkedIn profiles on the screen. Feel free to get in touch if you'd like to. The QR code and the link takes you to a Page on Paper's website where you can read more about the project if you want to as well. Cheers.
Thanks.